So this is the final episode for my rural kind of night scene mini series where I walk you through from literally design to final render, and I'm just kind of breaking down my entire process. So if you are new, start from the beginning, or maybe skip the design bit if you're just purely interested in learning how to render. And I'll see you here shortly. Otherwise, I'm going to be just breaking down this final render, moving forwards from last week, which we kind of just tied up all the loose ends. And I actually just kind of did a little bit more work on the composition, just adding a few more elements. I did a little bit of work on the lighting as well. So it's kind of these little touches that they do take a long time, but it's the final maybe 2 to 3% of the render that is just kind of the cherry on the top. And I didn't want to record doing that because it would have been about 8 hours long of me just moving plants up and down to get the composition just right. But I will be breaking down the composition for you anyway, and also the lighting, so do not worry about that. So this is the final render here, and this is edited in Photoshop using the camera raw filter. So if I turn so we're kind of going to go back to front. So if I turn the filter off, you can see before and after. So it's pretty significant from that the kind of the initial render to the final result. So I think like the render, when you actually click render, it's only 50% done. You really do need to focus on correcting the light, correcting the color, creating the mood. It's like taking a photo of a building and then editing the photo afterwards. You're taking something that's objective and then you're turning it into something that is your own artistic flair. So post-production is like super, super important, and it helps you to give your work a unique taste to it, but also you need to do the right steps leading up to the final render. Otherwise, it's just not going to have enough substance to then edit the color and stuff like that. So I'm just going to be breaking down a few things that I added. I can't quite remember if I added the. I think I did add the kind of awning out here, and I did add some lights, and I'll jump into the 3D scene soon. I added this window here as well, which I think it adds quite a nice touch to it. So once I had kind of set up the render view, I then was just like, like that right hand side feels like it could use a little bit more. So I also added the gutter, which initially I didn't have a gutter, but it just felt wrong. And like not legally, but technically you wouldn't need a gutter if you have like a rain garden and if you have stormwater management on the ground level. But even if you don't technically need one, it just felt wrong in this scenario. So yeah, I'm gonna jump into the 3D scene and kind of break down the final steps that I did. Cool. So this is the main file here. So just to quickly touch on a few things that I added, but from I guess last week, is this gutter. And essentially how I did it was I literally just made a cylinder. I mean, it's just basic modeling. Made it smaller, cut it in half, hollowed it out, and then I just duplicated that cylinder and then made it like really narrow and then made it slightly thicker and then arrayed that along, and that's what you see as the clips. And it's just those tiny little details that really make a big difference. And also, I mean, it's not super detailed, but I did add these little nails that I just felt like it needed a little bit extra. And I also added kind of an offset to the roofing array. So it's not, you know how the roofing is like a little bit, if you go back when I first did the roofing, it was kind of like a section and then I arrayed it. What I did was I actually created a slight offset so that there's an overlap in the roofing, because that's, in reality, that's actually the case. So you probably wouldn't notice it at all. But I think you do see a little bit in this section over here. You see kind of the nails, the screws for the roofing. And I think you do see a slight offset, so that helps a fair bit. Okay, and so with the lighting, I'm just going to quickly touch on that. Essentially, it's literally the same as before, like when I did the lighting for the plants. So if you guys are curious about how I set that up, go back to my landscaping episodes. But essentially, I just created one and then arrayed it along. I played around with the emission strength a lot, and it was just about finding that balance. And that's actually a significant part of the final touches to a render, is the light balance. So you don't want all your lights to have the same brightness or color. You want to really create something that's quite dynamic, and that's it's just something you don't probably notice outright, but it just adds to that feeling of depth and sophistication. So these lights up here are actually different. If I can, I don't know if I might need to go into the other file. They're different to these ones. And where am I? And if I quickly touch on the, I guess, rain screen window, I'm just going to quickly go into the architecture file so we can kind of show you how I did that. I mean, all of this stuff is just really basic modeling. I'm by no stretch of the imagination a good modeler. Like, I just work with boxes and booleans and arrays. That's it. So if I go in here, you can kind of see plants are clipping through. It's literally just, I just have a clear plastic material, which I'll show you the material here. And the reason why I did that, it literally just has roughness to the glass BSDF. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted it to be frosted. If we quickly go back to the Photoshop, it has that kind of nice warm glow to it, and that was really important. Cool. And so that material I also used, if I quickly go across to the front side, I just created, I guess, this the section out here, which kind of just made sense to have an awning. And that's just the same corrugate duplicated, but then I added that clear plastic material to it. That's what you see here. And it's just kind of that traditional, just like lean-to kind of roof. So it's just quite nice and non-flashy, but it just adds a bit of character to it. And yeah, so in terms of the material I used for the gutter, don't know why I forgot the word for that. I'm just gonna. It's literally the same rust material that I use for that. And I just reduced the. I increased the metallic value and reduced the roughness value. So you can see here, I honestly, when I added that, I was like, ooh, that looks really good. So I think it just reacts to the lighting so well. It just adds that little highlight that, I don't know, it's just super nice. And you'll also notice that I removed that house down there. And the reason why is because I just felt that it just kind of destroyed the composition. And I really urge you guys to like just really be free about what you do with your work. If it doesn't work for the composition, maybe just get rid of it. And in defense, that house could be way down and then you wouldn't actually be able to see it. So I still kept it for the design. Like if I quickly go to this, I guess, illustration of the design here, we are taking the shot from here, looking through, and this whole thing here, that could be way down, and it doesn't even matter. These illustrations, by the way, I did in Photoshop, and yeah, I mean that's just something that I like to add to my repertoire. When I post a design, I really want to make sure that people realize I'm a designer, not just a renderer. So, and that's just a personal decision for me. I really want to put my designs on the forefront, and renders are a way for me to express that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I did actually, from last week, I did actually change this. This was timber before. I actually just changed it to the same roofing. If we go back to the render again, you can kind of see it just adds a bit of interest. Otherwise, it's just too much timber. So I did make a few design changes as I went. And yeah, like I probably spent multiple hours. If I just quickly change this to black and white, we're going to analyze the composition really quick. Literally spent so much time on, if I make this, on this section here. I didn't want the composition to seem too forced. You want it to seem natural but nice. And before, it was just too perfect. And it was too concocted. So I just wanted to make the composition slightly less perfect, because in reality, you can't choose where to put the plants for a photo. So you just have to make do with what you have. If I just quickly make an adjustment node for with the levels, maybe levels, or maybe I'll do threshold. I might do threshold, just so I can show you guys how I plan the composition, and this is a great way, using threshold, to figure that out. So you can kind of see, if we look back, clearly your line of sight goes to the sky. I mean, that's pretty obvious. And you're kind of carried through. If I change this out of black and white, your eyes are taken from, let's get the red out. Your eyes are taken on this journey like this, to the kind of the focal point, right? And this focal point is made strong by the silhouette. Okay, that is something that I did plan. So this is literally, this value here is something that is kind of initially planned, and it took a long time to rotate the HDRI to get the right backdrop. I'm going to quickly bring up my pure ref scene, and you can see how long I spent on, and this will actually help show you guys my progress from last week. So this is kind of how it initially looked. You know, there's timber in there, there's no gutter. I worked on the lighting, and then I felt that the lights were too much. And then this is a little markup for myself. Still moving forwards. I did play around with having a gutter internal gutter. It felt not right. It felt too spaceshipy. And then you can see here, that's the existing, not existing, that's the lower dwelling there. I took that out eventually because it just didn't work. And you can see as I progress, this is with the HDRI shifting. And so what I do is I take a snipping tools of the world settings with the rotation of the HDRI along with the image. And what I do is I do every single I do maybe 20 degrees rotation or 10 degrees, and then I just keep going, and I just look at the composition and the focal point, and I keep going until I've done 360 degrees. And then I'm like, okay, this works. So what I felt about these last bits was that it brightened, if I turn this to black and white, it brightened the cladding up way too much. But if I go back to one of the first ones, I believe it's this one that I went with, it just kind of allowed that the foreground cladding to be a little bit less dominant, and that was really important to me. And yeah, so that's kind of the progression, right? That's it. And then you can kind of see here, this is the last point before I added that window. So if I take the threshold off and I go back, you can kind of see before and after. That window just allows you to, I don't know, it just takes away from the uniform nature of that, the timber there. It just adds that little extra element. And then you can see the lighting as well, just helps you to direct your eyes in. And actually, when I turn back on the threshold, you can see by having the lighting there, without it, it wouldn't be nearly as good a composition because your eyes kind of get lost. But by creating that highlight and leading it to the sky, you're creating a clear passage from the start of the image to the end of the image. And that is so important for you guys to understand. You want the eyes to travel as easily to the focal point as possible. But to do that, you need to create a entry point, okay? That's here. And then you want to lead it to the focal point. So whenever you're planning a composition, you want to think about A, how do the eyes enter into the image? And then B, where's the journey? And that's what makes a composition really interesting. Really think about that. And you need to think about that when you're planning a view. For me, it's just kind of natural. I don't necessarily need to think about it too much, because I've done photography for about too long, like 6 years, 7 years, and architectural photography and portraits as well. And so naturally I developed that compositional planning, kind of that subconscious planning. But if you're just starting out, there's no harm in just spending the time and planning it right from the get-go. Think about it in terms of black and white and values. So if you're trying to analyze a composition, turn it to black and white and then use the threshold Photoshop thingy, and then you can kind of just immediately see if it works or not. So guys, seriously do that. Okay, and so I'm just going to quickly touch on the render settings, and then we're going to go into Photoshop and show you the camera raw settings. Cool. So if I go back to the main file, this is obviously the file where the landscape and the architecture are linked into. And if I go to my render settings, so I rendered it with 2000 samples. 2000 I find is just decent. And I also did, 200% of 1080 by 1350. So 1080 by 1350 is a 4:5 crop, okay? And that is what Instagram can take without compressing it. So if you guys are doing a vertical shot and you would tend to post to Instagram, that's kind of my main output. Then think about the end result and how you can minimize Instagram destroying your image. So if you're doing just a normal 1920 by 1080 horizontal image, just do that, and then do that at 1080p, and then you can change it to 200% afterwards, and that will just double the resolution. Sweet. So 2000 samples. I also did medium contrast, which is the standard contrast. If you change it to none and then go back to medium, you'll notice literally no difference, I think. And then exposure and gamma, all that completely depends on the HDRI you're using. Just to recap, I think I changed the HDRI from last time. I used this Kyra 9 Dusk. Okay, you can search that up on HDRI Haven, and you can get it for free. So check that one out. I've actually used it on a few projects. It's really good. All of the Kyra ones, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. All of them are great. So check those out. And then and then also I did not enable denoising on the render. Okay, what I did instead was I went down to my view layer properties and I turned on denoising data. Okay, once this renders out, you're going to go across to your compositing tab, and then you're going to add this denoise node, okay, which the image goes into the image, the denoising normal goes into the normal, and the denoising albedo goes into the albedo. And then that goes into your composite. I wasn't using that glare node. I was trying to get it to work, but it didn't feel right. Okay, so that's literally it. And then you just save the image, and then let's go to Photoshop. So you check it into Photoshop, you create a smart filter, apply the camera raw filter. If you don't know how to do that, maybe just watch a quick tutorial. And yeah, so let's start with the basic panel. Pretty simple changes, like temperature was pretty much not touched. The highlights lowered a little bit, the shadows raised, the whites raised. So you can kind of see up here on the histogram, there's a pretty subtle kind of mid-range and lower end, but then it kind of ramps up in the high end. And that was kind of just I think that's a great way to create contrast. So if you guys are like wondering about histograms and stuff, play around with your image and just see what happens to the shape. Okay, ideally you wouldn't have any clipping, but I do, but that's okay because I kind of it was intentional. And yeah, so if I go down, a little bit of texture, really subtle changes, a little bit of curves, not too much. Okay, and then detail. Do not be afraid of the sharpening tab. That adds a lot. And then the color mixer. I think that's where the magic is, right? How ugly is that? Okay. What I did here, because the HDRI cast a lot of purple light, was I reduced the purple and magenta and blue. And then in the hue panel, this is when you can change the hue of each color and move them to a color that is more, I guess, how do I put this? You can move the purples to more of a blue, and you can actually turn purple into blue. So I didn't necessarily remove the purple with saturation. I actually just changed it to more of a blue tint. So you want to move your colors to maybe 2 or 3 main colors, and you want to move them as close as possible together. Unless your image is analogous, which is like one primary color, which is fine. You can have as many different shades of that color as you want. But if you're doing like a complementary color palette, which I'm doing blue and orange, or orange and teal, it's kind of in that realm, then you really do want to minimize the other colors. You'll notice I have a little bit of green and kind of that same orangey color, but I moved the shadows to more of a blue, and I moved the highlights to kind of that more orangey color. And then you can see in the green hues panel, that's how I did that. I didn't want it to go all the way because it just looked too edited, just slightly. And then color grading, I didn't touch. Optics, didn't touch. Geometry, nah. Effects, I added a little bit of grain, and I love doing that. It's so nice. It gives that photo kind of analog feeling to it. Takes away from that render, that perfection, you know. You want to add a bit of dust and grain into it. That's my personal take on it anyway. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So after that, what I normally do is I'll save that, and then I'll chuck it into a canvas size of pixels, 1080 by 1350. I'll chuck it in, and then my last final little little touch is I'll duplicate the render. Okay, I'll turn it into a high pass filter, and then you can play around with the number. You change that to either linear light or overlay, and then look at the before and after of that. That's incredible. Just so by compressing the image down from a higher size, you're retaining detail, but you're making it really crunchy. And so for Instagram, you just have to make it smaller. And so by introducing that same sharpness, you can kind of add that high pass filter on top, and it just adds that little bit of perfection that I like. So that's it. I really hope you guys have found this start to finish course. I guess it's a course. It's kind of just me showing my process. I do want to make a proper course for interior design, interior rendering and exterior rendering and all sorts of stuff eventually. But until I get to that stage, I'm just going to be doing a few of these series and showing my process. The next one is going to be this same project, but I'm going to be doing the interior. So stay tuned for that. And also, I'm going to be doing some more general videos about composition and lighting and HDRIs. And I'm probably going to do a few of those shortly before I get into the next render course. So I think they'll be pretty interesting. And please like and sub if you guys have found this really valuable. It means a lot to me. And I really look forward to seeing you guys next week. Cheers.